The Beatles' 1967 hit Strawberry Fields Forever has long been considered one of the greatest pop songs ever recorded. Released in February of that year as a double A-side single along with Penny Lane, the song peaked at number 8 on the US Billboard charts. The Turtles' Happy Together was at number 1 that week, by the way. In 2011, Rolling Stone named it the band's 3rd greatest song and the 76th greatest song ever written. Written by John Lennon, it's a true masterpiece, but what it isn't is a song about fields full of strawberries. The Beatles were going through a rough patch when they all splintered off in the summer of 1966, immediately following what would be their last US live performance at San Francisco's Candlestick Park. The Fab Four would eventually reunite for 6 more albums and one legendary unannounced rooftop live performance, but that wasn't known in the summer of '66. For his part, Lennon made his way to Almeria, Spain to star in the black comedy How I Won the War. With long waits between shooting scenes, Lennon had plenty of time to write. In just 6 weeks, he had a version of the song that would come to define the Beatles' second act. John Lennon's childhood wasn't a particularly happy one. When he was a baby, his banjo-playing father Alf was rarely at home and often away at sea as a merchant. Tired of his travels, John's mother Julia fell in love with another man and got pregnant with John's half-sister. This caused a tremendous rift in the Lennon family, with Julia's sister Mimi calling social services twice on her own sister for raising John in what she called an unfit home. Eventually, social services handed John's care over to Aunt Mimi, and he spent a large portion of his childhood at his aunt's suburban Liverpool home in a town called Woolton. The house is actually now a part of the UK's National Trust as a museum. John's relationship with his parents after that, well, it was tragic. He wouldn't see his father again for over 2 decades. John's mother, unfortunately, was hit and killed by a speeding car while crossing the road when John was only 17. According to Cynthia Lennon, John's first wife, while Aunt Mimi did care for John, she was not a woman for cuddles and praise. Ruling with an iron fist, John was expected to be obedient, well-behaved, and groomed. Later biographers would write that he had a hard time making friends. So it's little wonder that young John Lennon had a rebellious streak and would often go in secret to play in the gardens of his next-door neighbor. This was the girls' orphanage Strawberry Field. The history of Strawberry Field dates all the way back to 1870, when the property was owned by a wealthy English shipowner named George Warren. On the site, he built a giant Gothic mansion that was in line with England's Victorian era. It had a wrought-iron gate, gardens, and flowers. In 1927, another wealthy ship magnate named Alexander C. Mitchell purchased the mansion and property. 7 years later, Mitchell's widow sold it to the Salvation Army. On July 7, 1936, the home was opened as an orphanage for up to 40 girls. 2 decades later, boys would be allowed in, but throughout most of John's childhood, Strawberry Field was an all-girls orphanage. Years later, interviews would reveal the influence this foreboding, mysterious place had on Lennon's writing. In a 1968 Rolling Stone article, Lennon said that he was trying to write about Liverpool and had visions of Strawberry Fields because Strawberry Fields is just anywhere you want to go. And do note here that I'm not making a mistake. The song title is indeed Strawberry Fields, but the actual place is called Strawberry Field. Indeed, Lennon would later admit that this was a stylistic choice. Fields simply sounded better than field. Lennon also often alluded to how Strawberry Field was representative of his childhood. On the outside, it was foreboding, but once he climbed over that wall, it was full of wildflowers and secretive gardens. It's also thought that he greatly identified with the orphans who lived there, considering that he felt abandoned by his own parents. In 1980, he explained his childhood thinking. "There was something wrong with me, I thought, because I seemed to see things other people didn't see." When John Lennon brought the song back to the band in November of 1966, it was met with awe. Engineer Jeff Emmerich recalled to Rolling Stone that fateful moment. "There was a moment of stunned silence, broken by Paul, who in a quiet, respectful tone said simply, 'That is absolutely brilliant.'" Over about a month, the band tinkered and recorded the song. It's widely considered the most complicated recording the Beatles ever did. When the song was released in February of 1967, it was exactly what McCartney had said when he first heard the song John Lennon named after a Liverpool girls' orphanage. It was brilliant. Today, Strawberry Fields is in a state of disrepair despite continuing to be a tourist attraction for Beatle fanatics. In 2005, after nearly 70 years as an orphanage, it closed down and all the remaining children were transferred to foster families. While many of the original buildings and structures were torn down in the 1970s, a few still remain, including the iconic red Victorian-era Strawberry Field gates until 2001. The gates, which dated back to Warren, were put into storage and replaced with replicas, leaving many fans and tour tour guides who rely on Beatle-related income rather upset. Plans were announced in 2014 to turn the site into a training center for people with learning difficulties, along with a museum and artifacts dedicated to the influence the place had on the Beatles and John Lennon. However, as of the making of this video, Strawberry Field remains abandoned and mostly decrepit. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below and don't forget to subscribe. We've got brand new videos every day of the week. And if you're looking for something else, why not check out some videos linked to on the screen now. And as always, thank you for watching.